So this is October the 9th, 2020. And so I want you to see this picture here because this has been happening in the South LA area along Vermont, between Vermont, Manchester, and Ludlow, and probably in various areas of South LA. There has been a surge of killings and drug dealing also involved. There has been a history where when people have fallen on hard times, such as this pandemic, a lot of people are out of work. It causes people to go into survival mode and they become desperate. So there's been robberies, there's been shootings, there's been a rash of killings within a span of maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Uh, Even today, I crossed a street not far from between 92nd and 93rd off Vermont, and there were yellow tape, police cars. There's been a lot of times you'll hear um, police helicopters above, and they're searching for someone. And that happens probably, I would say, since the pandemic. It's been happening a lot lately, but it's been happening probably, I say, twice a month. And the killings, shootings, violence, it's happening like maybe, I say, twice every 2 weeks. There's a killing or a shooting or some kind of violent act, and I might be underestimating the level of the amount of what's going on. So I'm going to reveal to you something that I don't know if even the media is aware of this, but what has been happening that now I'm sure that I'm made aware of this is that some of these commercial landlords and these smaller landlords, I don't know if they're in on this. I would say maybe they're a little more cautious because they don't want to bring a lot of um, a lot of unnecessary attention to their place of business. It used to be in, I say, maybe the 80s, 90s, managers would stay on the premises. There might be some places that are still like that, where they have a manager or somebody that's acting like a manager. They clean up around apartment buildings for rental units, and so they're responsible for to kind of ensure the safety of the residents in those rental units. But what has happened, what I realize has happened more recently, is that I will take a real situation and I'll explain. There are drug dealers, and what they've been doing is they have somebody to apply for the apartments. Somebody who maybe their record is not that bad and they can apply for the apartment, and they lie and say that the occupants are working, and maybe at the time they're working maybe a part-time or a small job or something, but the persons will use themselves as um, a co-apartment occupant, because maybe they get the bulk of the income. There's some type of agreement that is made somehow, and they're able to get in these apartments. Now, because this is a neighborhood that's predominantly Black and Hispanic, and it has a larger number of Black residents, it's heavily policed, and there's a lot of poverty in South LA that I've noticed. And what has been happening is some of these landlords are turning their head knowing that they're allowing drug dealing going on in their buildings. And they're not really caring because the people that are occupying the buildings are mainly black or Hispanic, low income or poor residents, or they don't make that much money. And so if you're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of poverty, all the landlords are concerned about is just getting the rent, however need be. And if you got a few drug dealers in there, as long as you keep whatever it is that you're doing concealed or quiet and don't draw a lot of suspicion. However, what has been happening is because of the pandemic, there is more drug dealing. There's an uptick in South LA of the drug dealing, and it's more evident because when you're going to work and you're going to school and you're busy, you're not around to see who all of your neighbors are and to see what activities people are involved in. Usually people have routines. They get ready to go to work or go to school, or they stay busy doing something productive. But when you have this pandemic and businesses are closed or hours are cut, people have lost jobs, you're able to see a lot more that goes on in your surrounding community. So you're able to see who's probably, even before the pandemic even happened, they never actually had a job. They never were working a legitimate job. They never were employed anywhere, going to school, or doing anything positive. So a lot of these people were basically using whatever little lies they put on their application as a front, and whoever else helped them to get the apartment as a hanging out spot or a hub or a trap. They call them trap houses or trap apartments or whatever, drug dealing apartments. And so they all converge at maybe somebody's house. And so I've seen several incidences like this where you'll have several guys with backpacks and they come all at once, and then they've gotten savvy. They'll look young and they look like they're going to school or they're going to work, and they have backpacks, but what's in those backpacks is drugs, probably guns, money. And they, like if you live in South LA, you live close to the airport, and there's a bunch of motels and hotels up and down there, so you can do some of your transactions in motels and hotels. You can also go and do them at people's various apartments. But you have to be, usually they do these things at weird hours in the mornings or at night or late at night or early in the wee hours when people are asleep, because they figure they don't draw as much attention, but they do draw attention because they're the only ones that you can see that stand out, that have this activity that continuously goes on. And then you start seeing what you see here before you, the yellow tape, because innocent people get killed, and then sometimes maybe the people who are involved in the drug dealing, if they have enemies, they bring enemies because everybody's in competition on who's got customers and how much money they're making and who they're in connection with. So it becomes dangerous to live around an environment where people are actively participating in drugs selling. And so what has happened in these poor communities, because people are black or they're Hispanic or they're poor, the police is heavily policed. The police don't come out until people end up getting killed, or if somebody reports something, they never really pursue it unless they actually have hard evidence that the person is involved in whatever activity. So a lot of times black people in these communities won't want to talk to the police because they're afraid that they could lose their life, because they live in an apartment building or they live on a street in an environment where there's active killing and drug dealing going on. And oftentimes these commercial landlords participate in it by allowing these people to continue to stay in these apartments and carry on their activity. And when you as a resident complain about it, you're complaining too much, because these drug dealers are able to probably get what somebody has to work for in a month or in 2 months. They can get that in a week selling drugs. So they're pretty much using their drug or criminal activity and paying the landlords to not say anything about it. And the landlords are turning their head or pretending like they are unaware that this activity is going on in their buildings. They're more concerned about getting money rather than the safety of their residents that live in these communities. And so a lot of that is not being revealed. And so they wonder why a lot of these shootings and a lot of these things are happening, but this is why. So, like I said, I'm in the South LA area, and I've noticed that just in a number of months, very short months, that there's an uptick of shootings, killings, and drug activity in commercialized buildings where it's active. And there's been several complaints, several calls, but nothing's been done. And lives are at risk. And the dangers that follow with drug activity, most can all figure that out. And it always ends with this yellow tape. And so when you see streets where you see this type of activity happen more frequent, where there's shootings and where there's killings or yellow tape, those are the neighborhoods or the streets where the activity is going on in those apartment buildings on a regular basis, but nobody wants to come forward and say anything, because they've pretty much been forced, psychologically gagged, to not say anything because they're in fear they could lose their lives. So there are a lot of South LA residents who live in fear every day because they know that they live among drug dealing activity or criminal activity where you have like maybe 1 or 2 people who are involved heavily in that arena, and those people are like enforcers. And they've been very savvy about what they do. They use the internet and they use their cell phones to make the connections. They go to motels, and they also have backpacks where they have the drugs that they have, and they come one at a time. They don't use their regular car, so you can't get the license plate, because if you do, you're going to get a rental license plate or you're going to get paper plates. They're not their car. They drive fancy cars that they've gotten from a rental company, maybe over by the airport, because it doesn't cost that money to rent a car for a couple of hours if you're going to do your transactions. You want to have different cars so people can't trace you. So they have different phones for different activity they're involved in. So a lot of this is what's going on, and the complaints have gone in, but nothing has been done. And so a lot of people won't say anything. The police will walk up and ask questions. People close their door or they turn the other way, and they act like they haven't seen or heard anything, which they have seen and heard. They're just in fear of their lives being taken by these active drug dealers. And so there's been a lot of shootings that happen, and the shootings wind up, people are killed or they're in the hospital and they may not make it. And then we've had recently, there was a woman, the family was looking for her, and this was on 95th off Vermont in Manchester. And the family was looking for this young lady, and they kept walking up and down the street searching for her. And then one morning, her car, the car that she had shows up, and she was in the back seat of the vehicle, and someone had killed her. And so I don't know if they ever found who did it. And so there's been a lot of shootings not far from between 95th, 94th, 92nd, 93rd, 91st Street. There have been a lot of shootings, a lot of killings, stranglings, kidnappings. So these things are left unchecked. And this all seems like it's happened more now during the pandemic, because I think the uptick of the drug dealing is because people are desperate and they're thinking that they can get more money. And when people are, at a time of need, maybe they think that they can do more drug activity because of the fact that we're hearing defund the police, and there's a lot of hatred towards law enforcement. And we see some of the things that have happened regarding law enforcement, that the trust in these communities is broken down because you have a double-edged sword. You have the criminals, and then you have law enforcement, who some of the law and officers that are shooting black people are not doing, the ones that participate in that, if it's racial, are not doing their job of keeping people safe. People feel unsafe. They feel like they can't trust their neighborhood, what happens, and they can't trust their landlord, because the landlord is allowing the criminals to stay because they're getting a big payout from these criminals. And then, which I believe is partly extortion. And some of the landlords are participating in this activity by allowing these criminals to give them big money to stay in the apartments and carry on their activity. And they're pretending like they don't know what's going on, because see, long as their family is not living there and they're not living in the building, as long as they don't get caught up and blamed for the deaths of any residents, or anything happens, they can say they didn't know it was going on. They can always use that as an alibi. And so this is the kind of stuff that goes on over here. And so I know I have articles, I'm usually reading from something, but this is not something that I have to read from. This is something that I personally know is going on here in South Los Angeles. And so anybody that lives within or around between Manchester and Vermont and Budlong and along the lines of there, you'll see the homelessness, you'll see the drug addicts, you'll see drunkards, you'll see some of the people that are participating in this activity. But you're made to fear saying anything. You're made to be afraid to go out and live. You're afraid to live. You're afraid to go and throw the trash away. If you're just doing normal everyday things like going to the mailbox, you're afraid because you don't know if there's going to be what you see here before you, yellow tape, or if you are going to be the reason why this yellow tape is there. And so that is what is going on, and they're not talking about it. And I think a reason why they don't talk about it is because it's black folks, and they figure that our lives do not matter. Our kids' lives don't matter. I've even seen it where drug dealers, the kids are in the house where drug dealing is going on. And if some enemy comes and wants to shoot the building up, or they want to shoot at the drug dealers and the kids are there, the kids are going to end up getting killed. And so when you call DCFS to complain about what goes on in these neighborhoods, they come out, and then instead of them actively working towards trying to figure out and investigate what is going on in these households, they go to the person that made the phone call, and they go right to your door so that you can get in an argument or a fight with the very person that you're trying to protect the kids from. And so this is what happens also in these neighborhoods. That's why people don't call so much about child abuse. So I'm bringing that to the forefront as well. So a lot of stuff goes on in these neighborhoods that people are not made aware of. And a lot of times people who don't want to live like this, who don't want to live in fear, are made to feel like they can't speak and they can't talk about some of the drama that goes on in these neighborhoods. A lot of it is unnecessary. A lot of it is because of poverty. A lot of it is because of a lack of community involvement and money in these communities. These communities are oftentimes forgotten about. People will always post billboards about who they want voted for and who's going to actively do the work and the footwork in these communities to try to better them. But you see, even before the pandemic, there were businesses that were closing. There were areas that were really in need of repair, and they just are dilapidated buildings. And then these developers come and then they take an old apartment building, they fix it up, and hike the rents up. And a lot of these people are rent burdened. And that also is an indicator of what happens when people feel pressure that they're not going to be able to make the rent. So then they start actively seeking some criminal forms of illegal activity to make the rent. So you'll also have high prostitution around here as well. And so there's a whole host, a laundry list of things that are going on that you wouldn't believe. And just within a span of a couple of months, I've discovered that that's what's going on. That the more you call the landlord to try to explain to them what you may have seen that could be a problem, they don't pursue it. That's because they're getting paid money by the very people you're talking about. And what could happen is you could lose your life, because they will then get tired of you calling and they will pass the call off on somebody else. And a lot of times what is being said is that because of the pandemic, they can't put these people out. We can't do anything because there's a pandemic, there's a moratorium on the rent, a freeze, so we can't put these people out. And what do you do if you have drug dealing going on and somebody gets killed in these buildings? Then what? Are they going to still say that they can't put these people out? And so that is the problem. And so it's been a problem for quite a long time. So having said that, I'm going to let this video go. But that this yellow tape we see this like almost twice every 2 weeks. It's been happening a lot. There's an uptick in South LA of this going on, this killings and the drug dealing. Thanks for listening.